Somebody turn on the tape.
There you go.
Thank you. So we are evaluating the concept of hoil v'ishteri. That once there's a heter, we give other heterim. And we brought the case of a tvul yom and a metzora, that since we're lenient regarding the metzora coming in to get the blood and the oil put on his thumb and his big toe, we're lenient as well regarding if he became a bug carrier. So the Gemara wanted to say as well, if we're lenient regarding Eishes Ach, we should be lenient about Achos Isha as well. It means if Reuven and Shimon are married to sisters, and Reuven dies and the wife falls to Shimon, since he has a permission to marry because of Eishes Ach, even if the woman is Achos Isha, Hoil v'ishteri. That's where the Gemara is operating right now. So the Gemara does a very careful analysis. Let's say we have Reuven and Shimon, and we have Rachel and Leah. So when Reuven married, let's say Reuven married Rachel first, and then and then Shimon married Leah afterwards. So then when Reuven dies, the relationship between Shimon and that woman initially was only Eishes Ach. Later on, when he married Leah, that woman also became Achos Isha. But the initial Isser was only Eishes Ach. So then you'd be able to say, Migu the Ishteri Isser Eishes Ach. Since now in a Mokam of Yibum, Reuven dies, they're brothers, and there's a permission to override the prohibition of Eishes Ach, Ishtrinami Isser Achos Isha. So now that she happens also to be the sister of Shimon's wife, but that happened later, but you could say the svara of Hoil v'ishteri. Ella nosachai. Let's say Reuven married Rachel, and then Shimon marries Rachel first. Nosachai. And then Shimon marries Leah, the sister. So Isser Achos Isha Kodim, prior to being the Isser of Eishes Ach when Reuven dies, there was an Isser of Achos Isha, that Shimon's wife was married to Rachel first. And therefore, we wouldn't say Hoil v'ishteri. V'afilu nasa meis nami. And let's say the Reuven married first. So let's say Reuven marries Rachel. Shimon has not married Leah yet. And then Reuven dies. Then, and meanwhile, Yibum hasn't been done, but the woman had fallen to Yibum. And then Shimon marries the sister. The Chazila, the Beni, the original wife, Reuven's wife, was available to him through Yibum in the meantime. Maybe you could say Hoil v'ishteri. Ela nasa meis v'lo meis. But let's say Reuven marries Rachel and doesn't die. Then Shimon marries Leah. And then Lois Chazalei Klal. There was never a time of permission. So for example, we have the case of the Metzora on his 8th day. Once the 8th day comes, he's ready to bring a korban. You can't bring a korban at night. So if the night of the 8th is when he saw the carry, Ein machnis yadav lebehoinos. He's not allowed to put his thumbs in because it happened at a time that he was not capable of bringing a korban. And therefore, the statement of Ula regarding the Mitzvah doesn't have any relevance to the case of Yibum. So we have the word Elaki itzrich aleha. The word aleha that we've been using to say it's prohibited, it prohibits erva if Reuven is married to an erva of Shimon. That's heiche de nasa meis. Reuven married Rachel and died. V'achar kach nasa chai. And then Shimon married Leah. And in that situation, we needed the Alea to say that no, the woman that falls to Shimon, he can't marry her because she's his Neshasa. She's Nachosisha. The E-boy saying, maybe we're going to learn through a Hekesh to Amr Rav Yoina Vitim Rav Unabred Rav Yoshua Amr Kra. Ki kol asher yaseh, mikol tovasa elav nechrasu. Whoever does any of these ervis, any of these prohibited relationships, will get cards. Hukshu kol arayos kol neishasach. All prohibited relations have been compared to Eishasach, Ma Eishasach Sharia. And we would say, just like when Reuven dies and Eishasach falls to Shimon, there's a heter of kol arayos nami Sharia. We might think that if Shimon had married Reuven's daughter, right, and now the daughter falls to him, would also be permitted. Because Rachman Alea to say no. We could compare all the arises to Eshasach. Or we could compare them to Achosisha. My chos is to Achos Lachosisha, Kshin Leishasach. Why did you compare? Why did you make the Hekesh to Achosisha compared to Eshasach? If we have a choice to be makish a kula or a chumrah, we'll always go chumrah. Iboy sema by hacha treis rav hacha treis surah. By eishes ach and achosisha, there's two isurim. And by other ariases, if it's a daughter who's married to Reuven, right? If Shimon's daughter is married to Reuven, you have two prohibitions, daughter as well as eishes ach. Therefore, tremi trei alfinon. In case of 2 to 2, I can learn. Avalacha, in a regular case of Yibum, is only one Isur, Eishasach. Utrei mechad lo yalfin. Rava comes up with a noob shot. We've been trying to learn a source for if Reuven married Shimon's daughter, and then Reuven dies, and the daughter falls to Shimon. So it's an erva. So our Mishnah said there's no yibum, there's no chalitz. Where's the prohibition? We've been searching for why should an erva be prohibited. Rava says lo tzricha kra. We've been saying aleha is a pasuk that excludes the erva. But Rava says you don't need a pasuk for an erva. We already proved in our analysis a couple of blot ago. We said that if you're making tzitzis, and in the process of making tzitzis, you make shatnez. So you have the mitzvah asay of tzitzis, and now you have shatnez, and mitzvah asay overrides a lav. But that's only a regular lav. We were not able to prove that an asay is doicha, a lot asay that has kores. So Rava says simply, we don't need a pasuk because ein asay doicha lo asay sheish bo kores. The asay of yibum is not going to override the los asay of kores of bito. So why do I need the pasuk of aleh? Ki itzrich kra lemeser tzara, right? We said if Reuven has multiple wives, and one of his wives was Shimon's daughter, all of the other wives of Reuven also are prohibited for Shimon to do yibum, because they're called tsaros. And the pasuk says aleh litzror, that to prohibit the tzara. Because the tzara is not related to Shimon. Why shouldn't Shimon be allowed to do yibum to one of the co-wives, that it's not his daughter? Well, because those co-wives were married to Reuven, along with a woman that is an erva to Shimon, the pasuk excludes Shimon from being miyabim nitzara. Asks the Gemara, erva lo tzricha kra? What, you don't need a pasuk for erva? Batanya. Ein li'elahi. That's the tzara, mishum tzarasa. Ein li'elahi mishum tzara. So it's not just the, how do we know the tzara? So we need a pasuk even for the erva. Ay v'haktani ein li'elahain. That the hain refers to the other ervas. No, mishum tzara same. We're talking about the tzaras, not the erva. So Rava could be correct. Toshma, I'll bring you a proof. Rebbe Yomer v'lokach, it says, v'lakcha lo li'isha v'yibma. Now, what is this v'lakcha? And then it says v'yabein v'yabma. It says she has to be miyabim. Rabbi learns lesser tzoros va'arayos. Comes to prohibit if Reuven is married to one of the relatives of Shimon as well as the tzoros. So the pasuk is coming for the erva. Ema lesser tzoros shel arayos. No, it's only coming to prohibit the co-wives, not the arayos. Freit the Gemara trei kroi kanosivle. You brought me two psukim, the lakcha, the yibma. My lav chad le'erva v'chad le'tzara. One is to prohibit the erva, one is to prohibit the tzara, and therefore against Rava we do have a pasuk. Lo, I divided the tzara. Both the words v'lakcha and v'yibma go for the tzara. Why do you need two? Chad le'meser tzara b'makom mitzvah. So, when Reuven dies without children, and he was also married to Shimon's daughter, and Reuven had co-wives. So since these women are falling b'makom mitzvah, that's when the tzara is prohibited. However, chad lemishri tzara shelo b'makom mitzvah. Let's say Reuven is married to Shimon's daughter and other co-wives, and he has children, and then he dies. So Shimon, if he wants to, can marry, one of the other brothers after Reuven's death, can marry the Eshesach if she's a tzara. Obviously, Shimon cannot marry the Bito, but can marry the tzara if it's not b'makom mitzvah.
Why? It's Eshesach. It has to be a case where it's just some other guy, Joe on the street. He's married to Shimon's daughter and the tzara. And so he dies, and there's no mitzvah of yibum, and obviously he can't marry the Bito, but he could marry the tzara, I think.
Right. Well, Rashi says, "Miribui de kroyus sera de v'yidma darshin hachi." B'makom b'yidmahu de imlech damin lachamiyut v'lacha de miyitzar. It's when there's a yibum situation. For example, Reuven dies without children. Aval shelo b'makom yibum kigon tzaras bito minochri. Sharya. Eshesach is only when Reuven's alive, Kenny. If Reuven dies, so Shimon can't marry Bito, but he can marry the other co-wives because he's not alive anymore. Eshesach, the prohibition of Eshesach is only while the brother's alive. If Reuven dies with children, so these are widows, Shimon can marry the tzara. Shimon can't marry, the fact that they were related in the relationship with Bito of Shimon doesn't puzzle the Tzora from Shimon being able to marry after the death of his brother.
Okay, sorry.
No. You brought up, yeah, we have to analyze it correctly. And you may not marry your brother's wife while your brother's alive. Just like Achos Isha, Kenny. You can't marry your wife's sister while your wife is alive. If a wife passes away, you can marry your sister. It doesn't, the prohibition is only while they're alive in that situation. Now, Bito is Bito. That never changes. But all these prohibited relations that are through siblings, brother, right? That prohibition doesn't exist when the primary person is dead.
Mm.
So we need a pasuk. We might have thought that, like Kenny is learning, maybe even after his death, it should be prohibited. The other pasuk comes to matir the tzora. Chad lemishra tzora shelo b'makom mitzvah. My time. The yibma b'makom yibum with asira tzora. It's only if it's a yibum scenario where Reuven dies childless and these women fall. Shelo b'makom yibum shayit tzora. But if it's not a makom yibum, he just dies, then the tzora is permitted. So, for example, if he divorced the women, you can't. He's still alive. That's eshesach. It's only if he dies. We can deduce some of this from our Mishnah, the Tani. We described 15 different ervas, Bito, Kaloso, Chamoisoi, that if they fell to Shimon, all the co-wives would be prohibited as well. Now, the ilu pturos upoitros loiktoni. It doesn't say they're pturos upoitros, that they themselves, the tsaros, will later on pater, like shmamina, that it's a good right. Umaishna erva de loitzricha kro. Now, we said the prohibition of Bito, for example, doesn't need a pasuk. Why? For Shimon to live with his daughter, it's a law that has chorus. So the Asay of Yibum doesn't override it. Sora nami lo teboy kra, mishum de'ein asay doichelos asay sheyesh bo chorus. The Torah also shouldn't require a pasuk. That an Asay of Yibum does not override a Lota says Sheyesh Bakaris, because they're also Eshesach. Bibi Mar the Ravina, Hachi Kamina Mishmei de Rava. This is how Rava would answer. Tzara Nami lo yitzchakra, Enochanami. Bito doesn't need a we're talking about when Reuven dies childless and they fall b'malkum Yibum. All of these women, including the Tzaras, are Eshesach. So it's an erva. Excuse me, the Bito is an erva. The Tzara also doesn't need a pasuk because they're also co-wives, as we learned, and since they have a relationship with Bito, it would be an Isser Kares. It's as if he had died with children. Ki yitztrich kra lemishri tzara shelo b'makom mitzvah. Like we just said, you need the pasuk to tell you that there's not a mitzvah yibum. He dies with children. That now the Shimon is allowed to marry the tzara. My time. Amar kra aleha bimkom alehu dasir. It's when there is a yibum case that it's usher. Shelo b'makom aleha sharya.
But it's not just the tzara that he's allowed to marry. He's allowed to marry Esau.
He can't marry Bito. But Bito he can't. Remember, Bito he can't. And he can't marry the tzara if there were no children. Because the fact that they're related, the Malkum Yibum, the taint of the Bito erva goes to the tzara as well. They're all Ishasach, of course. But and therefore we don't need a pasuk there as well, like you're saying, because it's lav shein bokares, because it's a lav sheyesh bokares. But without a Makam Yibum, it would be permitted. You know what? Maybe if Reuven is married to Bito and Reuven dies with children, which is not Malka Mitzvah, maybe it also should be permitted. How? From Kal Vachomer. Pretty strange that Shimon would be able to marry his daughter. The Lav Kal Vachomer will become Mitzvah Asira. Why would we permit it? If in Malka Mitzvah, Bito is Asr, Shalom in Malka Mitzvah Sharia, it would certainly be prohibited. No, you could learn out from a co-wife. The b'malka mitzvah sira, v'shalom b'malka mitzvah shari, like we learned. In a yibum situation, they're prohibited. Without a yibum situation, they're permitted. Omerle alecha omer kra b'chayeha. Kol shebechayeha. Anytime, even shalom b'malka mitzvah, if she's alive, Bito is alive, it would be prohibited. Freik the Gemara, hi b'chayim abolim l'tilachar misa. The b'chayah comes to tell me that achos isha is not prohibited after the wife dies, right? Reuven marries Rachel. While he's married to Rachel, he cannot marry Leah. Rachel dies, he can marry Leah. Achos isha does not survive the death of the spouse. You're allowed to marry achos isha at that point. And we learn it out from Bechayah. So the Gemara says we don't need Bechayah because ahi mivi isha el achosa nafka. We learn that out that you can marry your wife's sister after her death from that pasuk. Freit the Gemara, I mivi isha el achosa. That's the source of the limud havamina. Maybe nizgarsha sharia. I might have thought that if Reuven divorces Rachel and is not married to her anymore, you'd be allowed to marry Leah. Talmud Lamed b'chayeh, kol sheb'chayeh. The afa gavdin is garsha lo. As long as she's alive, you can't marry her sister. So divorce doesn't solve it. The death of the wife allows you to marry your sister. El Am Ravuna bar Tachlifa b'nei Rav Trei Kroi Ksivi. There are two psukim. Ksiv isha el achosa lo sikach litzor. Don't marry your wife's sister. Uksiv legalos ervasa, to reveal her erva, which is the chada mashma. That refers. It sounds like it's only one isser. Haketzad bimkom mitzvah shten asur. That the erva and the tzara, shalom b'malka mitzvah, he has served tzarasa muteras. If Reuven dies with children, it's not a malkam yibum. Only the erva is prohibited. The tzara becomes mutter. The Gemara says maybe epochana. Maybe I will reverse that. Maybe I'll say like this: Bim kol mitzvah, when Reuven dies without children, he asura, the erva, Shimon's daughter, is prohibited. The tzarasa muteras, but the co-wife is permitted. V'shalo b'malkam mitzvah shten asuros. And maybe I would say without mitzvah, maybe they would both be prohibited. In Cain says the Gemara lo yomer aleha, but we learned aleha to teach me that you can marry the tzara. Shalo b'malkam mitzvah. Well, but there's an aspect of alel yisur, maybe dima lehed teira. Maybe it's completely to permit. Isha elachota lo tikach litzor. Don't marry your wife's sister and the tzara. Lohi v'lo tzarasa shelo bimkom aleha. Not her and not the tzara when it's not a yibum situation. Aval bimkom aleha shtan mutaros. Maybe even the erva would be mutter. Im kain legalos erva dechada echem ishkachas la. How are you going to reveal the erva? Ibim kom mitzvah shtem mutaros. The way you're learning, the malka mitzvah, they'll never be an issue of legalos erva. It's not going to be one is permitted and one is not. It can't be, because that case, both would be permitted or both would be prohibited. And legalos erva implies one of these women is prohibited and one of them is permitted. Gufa. Rabbi Yomer, we discussed this. The lakach, it should have said the lakach, but it said ulakcha. It should have said v'yibem, but it said v'yibma. La'asor tzoros v'arayos. For Rebbe, this is the source that if Reuven was married to one of the ervas of Shimon, both the erva and the tzara are prohibited. Where does it say anything about tzor? The od, this word v'lakcha v'yibma. We don't learn tzar from there. We say the tzaras militzror nafka. We had a pasuk litzror. So Rebbe though needs litzror for something else. Litzror mafikle Rebbe l'Rab Shimon. He needs for Rab Shimon. According to Rab Shimon, let's say it's not just there's a p'tur when Ruvain is married to Shimon's sister, but it also happens. Let's say there's Ruvain, Shimon, and Levi, and Shimon and Levi are married to two sisters, and Shimon and Levi die, and these two women who are sisters fall to Ruvain. That zika of Yibum makes them like co-wives, and he can't miyabim either of them. You hear? Reuven, Shimon, Levi. Shimon, Levi married to two sisters. Shimon, Levi died. These two sisters fall to Reuven. Reuven can't be miyabim either of them, because the zika of Yibum sort of connects them all. So then,
does he have to do chalitza, or they just go free?
it'll be considered like a tzara. We're going to look at Rashi. Shloisha achim. Shnai men nisu in shtei achayis. O isha ubita. Doesn't have to be two sisters. Any erva, like Shimon is married to one woman. Levi is married to her daughter. Umesu. Shimon Levi died. V'naflu fnei shlishi. These two women fall to Reuven. Now, Reuven can't marry both of them because you can't marry two sisters. You can't marry Isha Bita. So, like Mario said, Ariel Choltzos, Olomis Yapmos. If Ishashtem Zkukos, there's a Zika from the Kiddushin. The Zika Avikiktas Kiddushin. Zika is this relationship once a woman falls to a brother. And it's like a little bit like Kiddushin. V'imi Yabim Charbinayu. If he does yibum to one of the women, it's as if konosef achaz kukoso b'chayah. It's as if he married. He already is like mekadesh to the other woman, and now when he does yibum and marries her, it's like he's married two wives, two sisters. Uz kukoso avikishto. But a chlitza boy, like Mario asked, it still requires chlitza. Important Rashi here. Dulo alim lemehevi achos isha mamish. This Zika relationship that these two women, the two sisters, felt to Reuven is not strong enough to make it mamish like achos isha, to say you're potter without anything. However, Reb Shimon potters both from chlitza and yibum, and he learns it from tzror. That became tzoras zulazu. So the Gemara says, Sora hachiksiv, but we have a pasuk with tzror. In kain lema krav v'lokach. Could have just said v'lokach. My v'lakcha, her. Anytime you have like two kiddushins, like the case of two women falling, the iboy nosav high, sorry, if he could marry either one without a problem, then it's permitted. But if he can't marry either one because of the zika, both are prohibited. The word v'yibma is, we've learned, b'makom yibam udas tzara. It's when Reuven dies without children, and there is Shimon's erva in that cohort, that Shimon may not marry one of the co-wives. But shelo b'makom yibam shar yitzara. But if Reuven dies with children, Shimon, of course, cannot marry his daughter, but he can marry one of the co-wives. Now, Rabbanon learned this whole thing from a different source. So what does he do? What does Chachamim do? Ulachom hayavdilei. Miboy leilach Rav Yossi bar Chanina. Rav Yossi bar Chanina. Ulachah melamed shemagarsha beget umachzira. When you are miyabim a woman, it's a full wife to the point where you have to give her a get. There's no chlitza, right? Once you're miyabim a woman, she's your wife. And once you consummate it with yibum, the zika is not relevant anymore. So there's no chlitza needed. She's a regular wife, and therefore you pater her with a get. Not only that, as long as there's been no intervening marriage, you can, if you divorce her, you can take her back. So even though once she was an Eishasach, but once you did Yibum, it erases that. And now if you divorce her, you could marry her again.
What about, this is a side question, what about a ketubah on Yibum?
Yes.
You need one?
We'll talk about it. That's going to be a very important, we'll see that the man who does the Yibum gets all the financial assets of that wife. Then we'll see if he does Chlitza, she gets her ksuba. She doesn't lose her ksuba.
No, but I mean,
Chlitza.
if he does Yibum, doesn't he have to give her also a ketubah?
There's a ksuba already there from Reuven. I think he stands in that.
Okay.
He stands in that place. We'll see. We're going to go into all of this.
Yeah, but Al Korcha, we see here, Al Korcha, we said before, by the woman, if it's that he was Mukishkin, she doesn't have to. And you even said that she has to be Berwil, but so no.
We're not, hang on. We haven't, wait a minute.
That's the next
The Yibma is Al Korcha. So, meaning, Al Korcha means, Elazar, if a man forces himself on that woman, she's his wife, period. Yes, if you go to Bezdin and you're going through a process, she has a right to refuse, and they will demand chlitza. But if he raped her, for example, that woman is his wife. That's the koyach of yibum from this word, v'yibma. It happens b'kol makom. So it doesn't go against what you're saying, that in the normal course of halachic business, if they came to Bezdin and she doesn't want it, she's not forced to do it. About korcha in Yibum always means he did it against her will. The din is, for example, kiddushin al korcha doesn't work. Nesuin al korcha doesn't work. But Yibum al korcha works. When I say works, it creates the bond, and he would have to give her a get. Elazar?
Yeah, I hear it. But and also when he says when he takes her back, he also can take her back against her will too. But because it says here, the wording affects the fact that whereas intimacy is normal and consensual, in this case of Yibum, the woman's consent is not needed. So that would even that's by
Choizer Grushoso, he would not be able to do that Bal Korcha.
Oh yeah, okay.
The only time Bal Korcha works is b'makom Yibum.
Yeah, okay.
Once he married her, the
Right.
Yibum, that's the limit of Velokcha. It's regularly kuchin. She's a regular wife. And therefore now when you divorce her, you might have had a havamina. You know what? She was Eishasach. It's not Mokum Yibum anymore. No, that's all been erased. And now you can be Choizer Grushasa.
Yeah.
That's a quirk in this halacha. Okay. We're going to get into it, but not now. Rebbe, what is Rebbe? Rebbe used this for other things. How does he know these dinim? The Rabbi Yossi Bar Chanina Meliisha Nafka. The din of Rabbi Yossi Bar Chanina that you could be Magaresh Beget Umachzira, that she becomes an Isha. And the din of Al Korcha is Miyavama Yavo Aleha. From that pasuk, Nafka. The Rebbe who also doesn't need Aleha, my Ovidlei. Meboy Lelechedetanya. Ein Chayovin Bezdin. Ella Aldavar Shazdona Koris for Shigugoso Chatos. There is a din called Parhelem Dover Shel Tzibur. If an individual Jew eats chalev or dam, those are things that if you eat them b'mezid, you get koris. If you eat them b'shogeg, you bring a korban chatos. Now, let's say Bezdin paskind in the major butcher factory in Jerusalem that supplies meat to the whole country, that this chalev that they observed is permitted chalev. And 51% of Klal Yisrael ate that chalev. And then we find out that chalev was prohibited chalev. So they all ate it b'shogeg. The din is, each individual Jew doesn't bring their own korban chatas. This is a situation where Bezdin brings what's called a par helem dover shel tzibur, where it's one of the parim anisrafim. So Rebbe learns that the word alea is for the baraisa that starts, and the baraisa will continue. It's a complicated baraisa. But gentlemen, I hope you realize, up until today,